It's a tale of two cities as Alex Zietlow comes to you recording live from Charlotte, while Mike Kaye comes to you recording live from Frisco, Texas. This is your favorite Panthers podcast, or if you're in the comments section, it's probably in the top three. Welcome to the Lost Zietlow podcast. I'm your host, the previously mentioned Mike Kaye, and I'm joined by Alex Zietlow, who is in our home studio back in Charlotte at the Charlotte Observer headquarters. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad that we're starting 2025 addressing the comment section, which is something we're not supposed to do, Mike, but I'm glad we're here.
Those people are people too.
It's
Anyway,
true. It's true.
so I only stumbled upon it when I was trying to download the show before I took off on my flight to Frisco, and I zoomed in accidentally. I had no idea. I mean, there were comments from like November or October, and I just thought it was really funny. One of the comments was like, "These guys know football, but they're annoying and they're not very clever," which I then immediately went, "Dad?" Um, just kidding. He's very supportive. Anyway, if you do not like our senses of humor, this podcast probably isn't for you. But if you like football, it definitely is. And I got to watch some football in late January as somebody who covers the Panthers. Only it was not the Panthers who were practicing, it was the fellas at the East West Shrine game. And just to give you a background, the East West Shrine game is celebrating its 100th game. It's the oldest all-star game in the country. Typically, you would have the much publicized Reese Senior Bowl and the East West Shrine game. Those are the two big college all-star games. There are a couple of other ones that are actually really good for prospects as well, especially late round guys. This is more of where the late first round, midday two guys come. There's also a lot of late round picks. Senior Bowl, they've got a lot of great talent there, a lot of first and second round picks as well. But the Shrine Game is really trying to stay competitive with the Senior Bowl, and they brought in Shadur Sanders, who's expected to be a top 5 pick, so that brought in a lot of media. But anyway, the reason why I'm here in Frisco, Texas, is because last offseason, during Dan Morgan's first term at the draft, 6 of the 7 draft picks went to all-star games. They also signed a bunch of undrafted free agents from all-star games. So clearly the Panthers value all-star games. And, we wanted to be at one. I typically have gone to the Reese Senior Bowl the last few years or have broken my arm. It's been one of the two. And so I figured we'd give the Shrine a try. It used to be featured in St. Petersburg for years, and I used to do that a lot in my early career as a draft writer and then as a Jaguars beat reporter. Senior Bowl, I think I've done both 4 or 5 times, but the Shrine Bowl access has been terrific, and there have been a lot of standouts. We'll get to that a little bit later, but one of the big things that happened at the Shrine is the Panthers sent roughly 15 people from their front office suite to the Shrine Bowl to interview prospects, because you're interviewing a bunch of guys in round table. You get 15 minutes with guys. There's a lot of guys to interview. Everybody from Dan Morgan to Jared Kirksey, to Cole Spencer, to Eric Eager. There were a bunch of guys here to evaluate talent. And I thought what was interesting was from the analytics department to the college scouting department to the upper echelon of the organization, they were invested in this all-star game. They then went to the Senior Bowl. Some guys and girls have stayed behind from the scouting department, which has been interesting as well. And they'll stay around for the game supposedly. But I got to talk to Dan Morgan for a few minutes. We talked about his draft strategy and all that stuff. I put out a story on charlotteobserver.com. Alex, what was your biggest takeaway from what Dan had to say?
I think the coolest thing that he had to say was that he's down to use the phrase. Was this a phrase that you said or that he said, the phrase double dip?
I believe he said it, but knowing me, that does sound like something that I would say. So maybe I said it
really
within the
does.
question. I just don't. I mean, I'm losing track of all space and time, and I'm only in the central time zone. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought that was the most compelling thing that he said, because I think to the casual football fan, that's really what you are weighing when you're talking about this an NFL team's offseason machinations. It's like, okay, so the Panthers had a historically bad rush defense last year. Okay, they play their front seven. They have a 3-4 base scheme. Okay, so how do you go about balancing the need for linebacker, for inside linebacker, for edge rusher, and for an interior defensive lineman? All these questions that I think are quite natural. And Dan Morgan is kind of in his phrasing, in his own way, he said, we need ballers who can fill out that front seven, and we're not afraid to go after them in the free agent market and in the draft. So in your reporting, essentially what you said was, if we find a compelling guy on the interior defensive line in free agency, and somehow a compelling defensive lineman in the draft kind of like falls to them, maybe a Mason Graham out of Michigan, or a Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, or a Tyreek Williams out of Ohio State, or whatever, like, we're not afraid to take them too if that's like the best fit for them. I know that you spoke to him extensively, so you can speak on more exactly what he said, but I found that as a reporter kind of reassuring, and knowing that that's pretty consistent with what he said all along. He's been a guy who's been like, hey, we just need dogs, we just need ballers, we just need people who have talent and who have a desire to play. And like, I know that sounds like wildly basic for an NFL enterprise that is so analytically driven nowadays, but I just found that cool, and I found that pretty like normal, and also pretty like aligning with what the Panthers should be doing. So I thought that was probably the coolest thing. Did you find that compelling, or were you just kind of like, okay, that's general manager speak?
Well, what I thought was interesting is, so he said it Sunday morning, and then you watch the Eagles play, and Howie Roseman's known for like overcorrecting problems. So, like, he drafted Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter in back-to-back years because they needed to stop the run, and they needed pass rush in the interior. They drafted two DBs this year because they really need to fix the secondary. Good teams don't just fix the problem with one move, and I think that was kind of Dan's point. I also think it was pretty refreshing to hear him just say, yeah, we want everybody to fall in love with quarterbacks so good players drop. I think when you look at this class and other draft analysts who have studied this draft, front and back, it's considered a really good front seven draft. There's also a lot of good front seven talent in free agency. And I think for them, if they can mix a little bit of not old, but experienced and new, they'll feel really good about that front seven. You do have Ashawn Robinson. You do have Derek Brown coming back. I think they really badly need a nose tackle who's got the versatility to also play 3 technique and 5 technique, basically the rushing defensive tackle and the inside end in a 3-4. I think they need those pieces who can mix, where they can be a little versatile. If they're running an even look, that person can play inside. If they're working an odd look, they can move outside, kind of move and connective tissue there. I do think they need an edge rusher. I think Abdul Carter, based on my conversations here, is a pipe dream. Mason Graham's kind of interesting because I think he would be a home run hit for this team, but it's just hard to envision a bunch of ways that he makes it through kind of like the trenches of the top 7, right? I'll have a mock draft coming out on Thursday. We'll explore some stuff. And then the other guy, McMillan from Arizona, the wide receiver, I've heard there are questions about how fast he's going to run. He's obviously a big, talented guy. We'll see kind of how that turns out, but he could be an option as well. I think when you look at the grand scheme of things, one of the interesting things that Dan alluded to was, trading back is a possibility. And I think where they're at with this team, having more lottery tickets can sometimes be beneficial. Sometimes it can lead to, the 2021 class where there's like 3 guys left after like 12 picks, or, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so I think you've got to be careful with how far you trade back. I also think, like, in talking to other people, this is like a top 5 and then huge drop off class, which isn't uncommon, but it's not necessarily the sexiest outlook. I also
Right.
think, both these quarterbacks are probably going to be overdrafted, which means they could probably go in the top 3. Um, they're both really polarizing quarterback prospects, Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward from Miami. So it'll be interesting. Shedeur didn't throw here, but he elevated kind of the game. It brought in a lot of media. There were some other guys that didn't practice as well. But look, the Panthers have a lot of needs, and I think this is a situation where if you're going to follow the Eagles kind of blueprint, you are compelled to double dip, especially with the strengths of free agency in the draft class. And so that kind of gets into the biggest offseason need mode, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what this team's biggest need is. And I think it's very easy to poke holes in this roster. So in your opinion, what is the biggest need for this team?
Well, I think this is a continuation of the conversation that we're having. Just so Alex Zietlow is on the record, I think the Panthers would be wise to just get the best talent available on the defensive side of the football. Like whether it's a front 7 guy, whether it's a really compelling cornerback, perhaps don't draft a safety, but those guys aren't really premium. That's not a really premium position in NFL drafts anyway. But the reason why I say that is because, and Mike, you can feel free to push back on this, but I personally think it's a fool's errand to try to extrapolate someone's college ability and make a judgment of, oh, he won't work in this professional scheme versus, oh, he will work in this pro scheme. I don't think it's fair to the college player because it's still like in college, you're still very much developing. You're still very much learning the dimensions of your body, the dimensions of your talent. I also think it's kind of narrow-minded as an NFL talent evaluator because, like, if you're investing in a draft pick and they're going to be on your squad for 4 years, 3 or 4 years, like, schemes change. Defensive coordinators move around. Like the player turnover in the NFL is a real thing, but so is the coaching turnover in the NFL thing. So, or in the NFL as well. So, like I just want to be on record and saying getting the best talent on the defensive side of the ball is most important. Secondly, when we talk about this Panthers 3-4 scheme this past year, the same one that Zero Evero is going to employ in 2025, there's been a lot of scrutiny, and deservedly so there. We don't have to relitigate the horror that was the 2024 run defense, but I'm saying, like, that 3-4 defense, like, just anecdotally in the press box, you can tell that they weren't always running a base 3-4. They sometimes had 4 interior down linemen. They oftentimes had Shaw Smith Wade in there at nickel corner. So like I say all that to say there was a study done by this guy Cody Alexander. I wrote this down. They ran their 3-4 base defense 31% of the time in 2023. And I would imagine that number actually decreased in 2024. He hasn't done the same study that he did in 2023 yet, but I imagine that decreased. So all of that is to say that it just puts a premium on getting good guys, on getting talented ballers, and not stressing so much the scheme that I think a lot of people are kind of like doing, or perhaps they're trying their best to resist doing that, but they're still kind of doing that. On top, but still, like, all that aside, I think if there is one big offseason need, it's what I was talking about earlier. It's the interior defensive line. You got Derek Brown, who is a master, as he proved in 2023, of like moving the pockets, directing the ball where he wants to go, absorbing double teams. You got Ashawn Robinson, who is quite good at a similar thing. He had a standout year last year. But like who else is there? Jaden Cromity's coming along, and has, at least according to my eyes, has shown signs of development at the end of the season. Shai Tuttle struggled at the end of the year. You really need another guy who can help control the line of scrimmage and help, at least at the beginning, at the point of attack, like, stop the bleeding of this run defense. And that's my opinion. I know that like other people have different opinions on how you can best like quell the issues that this porous defense had, but that's where I think. And I think you can do that in a variety of ways. You can do that in free agency. I have a list of guys that I think are like compelling free agents for the Panthers to like kind of go after, and we can get into that if you want. But I think, but like if we're just gonna talk about service level stuff, I think it starts in the interior defensive line. Is that kind of your number one, or do you think that it starts elsewhere?
No, I think I think to make your point a little bit more narrow, I think the front seven is really where you look at it. Do you fall in love with an inside linebacker who you think's an upgrade over Josie Jewell or Trevin Wallace because they are an upgrade and because you just need premium talent? Do you look at an edge rusher who you view as a long-term answer over Jadeveon Clowney, who's entering a walk year, or DJ Wadham, who's entering a walk year, as well as he played down the stretch? I think you have to be open to the best player available in a specific sense. There's no such thing as an actual best player available. When it's
Right,
BPA,
right.
it's really who the BPA is in your perspective, right? Like you could say that guy was the top guy on my board, but he's like the 80th guy on the Dolphins board or whatever. So I think
Hmm.
people getting a little too general with the BPA thing. BPA exists in a realm of, well, that just means we're going to draft a guy and he's not an immediate need. That's not a BPA.
Right.
That's like the best evaluated player for for that one team, whatever. To your point about the 3-4, most base defenses are now nickel defenses. And so you're having 5 DBs and 6 guys up front, whichever way you want to manage that, whether it's a 3-3 or a 4-2 or whatever. It's a situation where nobody's actually truly playing a true 3-4 for more than 40 snaps around the league. It's just not like a thing. And they play so many shell coverages. It's just like the back end is really important. So maybe it says, hey, let's, Mike Jackson's a guy. It feels like that both sides want to get something done. If they bring him back, maybe you draft a corner anyway. Maybe Will Johnson from Michigan falls and
Uh-huh.
you say, hey, him and JC Horn could be a tandem for years to come. Or you say to yourself, Malachi Starks has got great ball skills and he's a safety from Georgia. Maybe we can get him to upgrade our unit and we can save some money on the free agent market by only signing one premium free agent at safety. Maybe you say to yourself, hey, and obviously safety and corner are not part of the defensive front, but like you say to yourself, if Mason Graham or Abdul Carter aren't here, you trade back and maybe you get the second best, you know, interior defensive lineman, edge rusher, safety, cornerback, whatever. I just think this defense needs a lot of TLC, and really, on offense, it feels like wide receiver and tight end are the real gateways to improvement because the offensive line seems mostly set. Even if they stay still on Moden for a year and take that cap chunk that he has, just so they can be a little bit flexible in the future, or what have you. Even if they turn down Nicky Ikwanu's contract number, he's still under contract at left tackle, and he's at worst an average left tackle. So you've got the guards situated. You're probably going to bring back somebody internally to start at center. They were really happy with the way Cade Mays performed last year. I also think we've talked about this before, but you could probably get Austin Corbett and Cade Mays for the price of Brady Christensen, because I believe Brady Christensen's market's probably in the $7 to $8 to $9 million a year range, while I think Corbett's probably going to need a prove it year, and the tender for Mays shouldn't be over $3 million. So um, I think the offensive line is largely set unless something catastrophic happens with surgeries or whatever. Mays is basically under team control. It's just a restricted free agent. But yeah, it feels like wide receiver and tight end are the two spots. And I don't know if McMillan's not there, if they would still go wide receiver. Tight end, I think that'd be a little rich for their blood going at 8. But yeah, I think front seven, you're spot on there.
Wait, Mike,
Yeah, go
say
ahead.
something? You said TLC,
Tender
and
loving
I was
care.
yeah, bro, I was literally like, yo, what position could possibly be a TLC?
I don't.
I
Well,
was
a
like,
position not played by scrubs. Uh,
that's that trademark clever that you
yeah,
come for
can't wait for the
processing, but
comments on this one. Oh,
Oh,
Zach just dropped a bar and he said, "Hey, don't go chasing waterfalls." Man, I love this podcast. I'm sorry, haters gonna hate. Anyway,
nah, but that was so funny. And then I mean, I'm not too embarrassed to say it. I looked it up. I was like, what does TLC mean? And then it said tender loving care, and I was like, that can't be it. But then you started talking about, okay, how do you nourish the offense? I was like, all right, well, this is kind of a strange thing that a Mike Kaye would say. So I was like, all right, yeah, this makes sense.
anyway, but
Anywho,
remember, Alex identifies as a millennial. Anyways, so with that said,
okay, one last point. Wasn't TLC like a channel? Like, wasn't that a
yes,
channel
it
at one point
was.
on cable? Yeah,
Yeah,
all
they
right.
did like house renovations and like it was like HGTV, I believe. I don't know. I
Word.
wasn't a big
Okay.
TLC TV guy. Um. Anyway, but you know what I was a big guy with is I like to scout and I like to kind of watch players. I mean, I'm no
Yeah, man.
expert. I'm just hurt, but I think that reference only Alex probably understood that. Um, let's get back on track, Alex. So I'm in
Jeez
Frisco,
Louise.
and look, I think the Panthers were wise to bring out a lot of scouts here because the front seven folks are really playing very, very well. I've been impressed by a lot of guys as far as those positions are concerned. I don't think when we look at these rosters, and everybody knows that I have trouble pronouncing people's names and stuff, but I think when we look at these rosters, you will see some of these guys on the Panthers roster next year. Um, I mean, I came and was really fascinated by some of the South Carolina guys like Tonka Hemingway and Rocket Sanders and Joshua Simon um, among the group. But really, the guys from other schools have stood out, you know, as well. I was really hoping to see Q Robinson from Alabama, but unfortunately,
Hmm.
he's not playing in the game. He strikes me as a guy who fits in with that Dan Morgan coming from a winning culture, coming from a production standpoint sort of thing. You're going to see a lot of rotational pass rushers come out of this game if you watch the game on Thursday. And I think, there's a lot of talent on defense, not so much on offense. If I had to really like come away with like a general point here, there have been some quarterbacks who've made some plays, wide receivers kind of, LeJontay Wester from Colorado has really impressed me. Ricky White from UNLV has impressed me. Nick Nash from San Jose State. Those are like the wide receivers who've stood out, but those guys are going to be day 3 guys most likely. I've been really impressed by kicker Andres Borregales, who's been coached up by Panthers assistant coach Darren Bates, who's done an awesome job. He's gotten a lot of praise for his energy in practice from scouts, from coaches, and players as well, actually. And so I've been kind of watching the special teams group just because as we've talked about several times, all 3 specialists are set to become free agents. I've reported this a few times, but the expectation is that Eddie Pinheiro is probably headed elsewhere. After an up and down season, I expect them to bring in a young kicker, probably a cheap veteran as well to compete. I think JJ Jansen and Johnny Hecker both make sense on 1-year deals. We'll have to see how that plays out. But defensively, the West group seems a little bit more talented than the East group. Boise State edge Ahmed Hassanin, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's really impressed me. Kind of reminds me of Trent Cole. He used to play for the Eagles and the Colts.
Hmm.
Really low center of gravity, very compact, tight body, but he's got such a violent speed with his hands. He's a guy who's been talking a lot. He's been coaching up his teammates. He's been offering insight. And he's just winning in every way. He's winning with swim moves. He's winning with spin moves. He's been able to slice through double teams and individual drills. Really impressive undersized rotational pass rusher. Tyler Beatty from BYU is another edge that I think has played very well. But really the story, in my opinion, of the West team with Shedeur Sanders not playing is their interior defensive line. Okay, I'm going to give you some
Mm.
names. Eric Gregory from Arkansas, CJ West from Indiana, Tommy Aking Besute from Maryland, all have stood out. They have all played very, very well. Um, they're showing a combination of run stopping and pass rushing. I think they can, all three of those guys can play nose tackle or defensive end in this 3-4 front. I also think they can play inside in 4-3s. There's talent there. And then another guy who stood out, and I've actually gotten asked about him a lot, is Iowa tight end Luke Lachey. He's caught the ball cleanly. He had a touchdown catch today. We're recording this on Monday. I think he's been pretty impressive. The Panthers probably aren't looking for O-line help here for the most part, but I thought Bryn Crenshaw Dixon was really the standout for Florida, played left tackle. If the Panthers decided, hey, Moton's not going to work out or Icky's not going to work out, uh, I think he makes sense as a guy to add to the crew. He's probably going on day 2. Um, I know I'm kind of just like listing names here, but there have actually been a
Well,
lot of standouts that I've really been impressed by. Um, and I think they will add from this group. I think that the quarterbacks that have interested me are Kyle McCord, who I think will go way before the Panthers even think about selecting a quarterback. He's from Syracuse. He's also joined by like 45 other Syracuse players. I've never seen so many Syracuse helmets in my life, and I grew up watching Syracuse, so it's been really impressive to see their full on you know takeover of this game. And then, the Maryland crew has been very good. Um, Ja'Cory Brooks, a wide receiver from Louisville who played at Alabama with Bryce Young, said that his favorite moment was the Iron Bowl catch. He's the one that tied the game. Bryce threw him a touchdown to tie the game in the Iron Bowl in 2021. But he spent last season at Louisville. He's a guy who could be a late round option. Um, and then
hey,
Rondé
Mike,
Gadsden, a tight end from Syracuse, is another guy I like.
um, I'm just curious as some because I've never been to a Shrine Bowl game, and I imagine a lot of people who are listening and and who have been following you on Twitter and have been watching you go to all these practices and literally like stand on the field while these guys are playing. Like, what do you look for? What are you looking at when you're watching, say, I don't know, an offense run through team drills? Like, are you zeroing in on one player that has caught your attention that you've like done research on? Are you watching the ball and seeing and seeing like kind of just trying to take in the general action? What are you doing?
Well, I think it's kind of comparable to the training camp practice. You're trying to see who sticks out. And unfortunately, beat writing is like a different practice than draft writing, right? Like draft writing, you're watching tape all year. We're busy. We're focusing on the team that we cover and all that stuff. And I haven't done a ton of tape, especially on these guys. So just kind of who catches my eye from an athletic standpoint, from a technique standpoint, who are the coaches kind of focused in on, who are they
Mm.
praising, speaking to scouts, speaking to coaches and attendants, speaking to really, I mean, it's mostly scouts here, but like speaking to people around the league and kind of getting an idea for like, hey, where do you think this guy goes? What do you think, where's his fit? Stuff like that. And so, you see a bunch of familiar faces on the road if you've been doing pro day tours or senior bowls or shrine bowls for the last decade, which I have. And getting feedback is really important because while we have some insight as people that cover football, it's always good to go to the experts and get some perspective, especially when you're going to go down and you're going to sit and watch some film afterwards because you want to make sure that their performance at this all-star game matches what goes on film and what happens at the combine. Like, for instance, like if a guy, like a famous example is like Cooper Cup showed up at the Shrine at the Senior Bowl, his draft year, and had a considerable buzz coming out of Eastern Washington. He was like the small school guy that everybody loved, and then he went out and he kind of performed, and he was like fine, like
Uh,
whatever. And
uh-huh.
then he gets drafted in the 3rd round, which kind of confirmed the league's outlook on him as being kind of like an average prospect, and he goes out and he has an incredible career. So it's interesting to see the dichotomy of that. Conversely, OJ Howard, and that I believe it was the same Senior Bowl, just like absolutely just like dwarfed everybody there. He was the most talented guy on the field, and then he quickly, fell out of favor with the league. So, it's interesting to see kind of how these guys do and watching their film and watching how they perform and getting feedback and information from other teams. I mean, I think for me, it was the opportunity to speak to people from around the league. It was my opportunity to kind of get a glimpse of what some of these players are about and kind of say, hey, look, this is the research that I have from my eyes and my notes. Now I can go and watch film when I actually have free time now that the team's not going through a coaching search or a GM search. And so I can share it with you guys.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's fascinating. Do you want to move on to the next segment?
Sure. So let's talk about what's kind of going on as far as the coaching search is concerned, because not everything is staying static. So I believe since our last show, the Panthers have moved on from from safeties coach Burt Watts, outside
Uh-huh.
linebackers coach Tem Lakabu, defensive assistant Bobby Maffei, and passing game coordinator Nate Carroll. I don't know if they're going to fill that passing game coordinator position. I don't know if they're going to add another quality control coach. They already have a pretty big coaching staff to begin with. I spoke to Dan Morgan. He wouldn't give me any names. Wanted to, allow Dave Canales to operate on his own, which I respect. And he basically said that they're in the middle of making these decisions. He said, the strength and conditioning group, who they had a kind of a blow up at the top of their food chain there. That might take a little bit longer because they want to take their time there. But from the standpoint of the defense, it feels like those positions are going to be filled well before the combine, which is great because then those guys can study the talent at the combine and have an idea of what they need going into Indianapolis, which is a big moment for the scouting process. So I would expect those to come soon, maybe in the next week or so. And I think they'll rebuild and retool that staff and kind of build it in more of Dave's image than maybe Evero's image. And so that was like the update I got. He kind of kept it close to the vest, which I don't blame him. I mean, if you're negotiating with coaches, like I get it. But you have to ask about it. So,
Right.
yeah, we'll see how that kind of all unfolds. I mean, I know this show is for the sickos. So those folks, I actually get a lot of questions about the outside linebackers coach, which I find fascinating because I thought I was the only person that cared about assistant coaches, but so that's been interesting. But also remember, like with the safeties coach, it'll be interesting to see how they do that. Do they bring in a young guy because they already have D'Angelo Hall there, and Jonathan Cooley oversees both positions anyway, as the passing game coordinator. And then, with outside linebackers coach, you already have Todd Wash, who's really experienced as a defensive line coach, and Pete Hansen, who's been with Evero for a really long time. So it'll be interesting. Is it going to be somebody who has a lot of experience? Is it going to be a guy with NFL ties? Is it going to be a college coach like Tem was? Like that's kind of interesting to me. What do you think of this whole coaching staff minor shakeup?
If I'm being completely honest, I don't have a ton of thoughts. I'm I
Whoa,
I know.
what great radio!
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, the Nate Carroll piece was interesting because of his name. Pete Carroll just got a head coaching job with the Las Vegas Raiders, obviously. I think um I think retaining Evero and then kind of mixing up his defensive staff was compelling in a variety of ways. Among them, Avera was this guy who last season had a really good year, like put together a really good defense, and then lost a ton of personnel on the player side. And it became difficult for him, and it just like that was not conducive to what he wanted. So they respond. The Panthers, at least, like on the surface, responded by going out and getting a lot of players who he's worked with previously, among them Josie Jewell, Sean Robinson, all these people. And so now the Panthers have said, okay, we're going to shake up your defensive, your assistants. How do they kind of, I don't know, keep him happy? How do you kind of build a staff that is a compromise from what Avero wants, but also puts out a better product on the field? Don't exactly know, and I think that we'll figure that out in due time. I imagine that these assistant coaching gigs are more for the up and coming kind of person, but like you said, you already got a lot of young guys who are pretty good on this defensive staff. I've been really impressed with Jonathan Cooley when I've talked to him, and like doing as much as he possibly can with that secondary groups, the defensive secondary group. So that's how I feel about that. Also, who would have thought after this crazy head coaching cycle that the Panthers are in such like solid shape when it comes to their head coach in comparison to at least their rivals, the New Orleans Saints? You wrote about this in the newsletter this week. How did the Saints not have a head coach yet, man? Like I find that riveting.
I mean, look, I think there's only 32 of these jobs, but that job feels like number 32 of 32, and they're facing an uphill battle. They're kind of in QB limbo with Derek Carr, who is making a ton of money. They have over 50 million in salary cap debt, the worst in the league. They've been kicking the can down the street. Oh, and by the way, the guy who's architectured or been the architect for those woes is still there. So it's like, yikes. I don't know that it's the most compelling place. Like, I think it's probably better for a retread, which is what their previous head coach was in Dennis Allen. Like, if this is your one shot at the apple and you feel like you can, if you want to bet on yourself, go for it. But I also think, you look at Bobby Slowick in Houston, where he was, one of the top head coaching candidates, decided to go back to Houston and then gets fired after a rough year. Like, Byron Leftwich, the same thing. You've got to kind of strike while the iron is hot, or at least warm. And I think, their coaching choices, they've interviewed Mike Kafka from the Giants. They've interviewed Steve Spagnuolo, or I think they've interviewed Mike McCarthy. Sorry, I've been kind of lost in the sauce of the Panthers
No, I think you're
draft.
right on both of those. Yeah.
But and then they want to talk to Kellen Moore. Like, if I'm Kellen Moore and I'm on the cusp of a Super Bowl, like, I'm going to have that on my resume forever. If I win the Super Bowl, why jump to, an unappealing job? I just like,
Right.
to me, they should hire McCarthy and just like kind of figure it out. And if he doesn't work out, you're just firing him in 2 years anyway. So, tough beat,
We got
New Orleans Saints.
we got nihilistic Mike out here.
Yeah, in talking to people over here, it's just like, cool, it's an open job. I mean, like, Liam Cohen's getting a lot of flack for leaving the Tampa Bay Buccaneers high and dry, but when you're making the type of money going from an offensive coordinator to a head coach, and they're basically writing you a blank check and saying, oh, you can also have your own GM. I mean, it's kind of hard to pass up. He should have handled it probably a different way and a better way, I guess, based on the reporting. But like, that's the thing, is like, everybody faults guys when they want to get their money. But the truth is, coaches get fired all the time. Coordinators get fired all the time. They got to focus on their family. It's the same thing with players. And, sometimes you got to make an astute decision. And maybe it's just like, you know what? Yeah, maybe I'll get fired in 2 years, but I can always I'll be set for life, and I can always go back to being a quarterback's coach. I guess maybe that's the mindset if you're a young coach looking at the Saints. But, with that said, I don't mean to end this morbidly, but apparently we're not funny or, particularly clever. So,
Oh my God.
it was just so weird. I was just trying to listen back to this podcast, and suddenly it was like, what? Well,
Wait, before I do my outro, who you got in the Super Bowl?
I have a feeling that the Eagles
Or did
can
the Black
run
Eyed
on.
Peas?
Yeah, I've got a feeling the Eagles can really run on the Chiefs, and I don't know if that'll be enough. It just kind of seems like no one can beat the Chiefs, but this does seem to be the most vulnerable Chiefs team that we've seen. And I don't know. I just like, if you look back at the previous Super Bowl these two teams played in, Jalen Hurts played the game of his life. And if they have a better punter and perhaps a better defensive coordinator, they win that Super Bowl. Well, guess what? Now they do have a better defensive coordinator and they do have a better punter. So maybe that's the recipe. Plus, you got Saquon. So I think this is the most talented team that Howie Roseman's ever put together. I covered him for 4 years. I think this is better than any team that I've covered in my career, um, including the 2018 Jaguars, who went into the AFC Championship game, or the 2017 Jaguars, excuse me. So, I kind of lean towards the Eagles just because I think defense and the running game can be a deadly factor, especially when you're trying to keep Patrick Mahomes off the field. How about you? What do
I
you got?
agree. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. The only issue is
Patrick
like,
Mahomes.
well, just that offense, man. Like they answer when they need to, and the defense is really solid. The defense made a huge fourth down stand against the Bills against one of the best runners in one of the best quarterback runners in the league, in Josh Allen. It's not the same thing as the tush push or the brotherly shove or whatever. I know that. And so if you want to equate the Eagles and the Bills, and you say, okay, the Eagles do get that first down, how does that change the complexion of the game? Like, I understand that. I think the Eagles are like more talented, but I see a three-peat, dog.
I mean, it's
I just
Patrick. You
do.
mean it's Patrick Mahomes? It's hard to really. I mean, it's hard to bet against him. Really. I mean, the Bills can't beat him. What makes you think the Eagles can? Right? Like, it's like one of those things. Like, so it'll be interesting. I mean, the Eagles are gonna. This is gonna be teams that beat the Chiefs get up by 10 to 13 points. You
Right.
cannot play a one possession game with the Chiefs. It's just like that. I mean, if it's a one possession game going into the fourth quarter, the Chiefs will win. It's just kind of how it is. So they've got to hope that the Eagles have to hope that they have a similar performance as to what they did against Washington. I don't think they will, but I do give them a fighting chance. I don't know. If you said 1.5 points, it wouldn't shock me if this thing came down to 1 point, honestly.
Mm, yeah. Well, the line is 1.5 points. I'm pretty sure.
It
I saw that.
is.
So
But yeah, send us home, Alex.
yeah, that'll be fun. All right. Thanks as always for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself, and our wonderful producer / comedian Zach Dennis. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to CharlotteObserver.com for all your Panthers needs. Mike from Frisco, stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
I'll do my best. That's a wrap, Zach.